Let me see if I can engage the doctor, the coach, the storyteller, for a little while. Hi, Dr. Mafra J. Sakafet.
Mwen la sa kote mwen, pastor.
Mwen la, ou la poko poko ou bien là.
Mwen bien. Se mwen ki bien. Mwen tan nou di de kesha tale ya. Idi moun ki ni pli mouve. So nou ni pou jeute. Nou ni pou kani souri toutan. Smile.
Ça bon, bon parole, bon parole.
Right?
All right.
Oui.
Mon wè ou ka porti dase la.
Oui, mwen konta müzik la ou ka jwe.
Ou se dase bon?
Of course.
All
Dominic
right.
mwen sorti, oui.
All right, bien.
Mwen fète vek müzik an zo mwen.
Oui, Papa. All right. You're a storyteller, I see. I know we're going to go on air in a few sec. But I just engage you for a brief moment. What are the stories you tell?
Usually I try my best to write stories that represent children in their own setting. So for example, when I was growing up, I read stories about daffodils and things that I did not know existed until I was older. So I've written 2 books of fiction for kids where I'm trying to get them to talk about accountability, anti-bullying, being able how to be good friends. But at the same time, there are canips, there are mangoes, there are trees that they're familiar with and places that they're familiar with. So when I tell stories, I want children to know that where they live is also important. The animals they live can exist in books as well. And so that's what I focus on a lot of times.
Wonderful. Well, it's your time and I'm happy I'll be listening. So take it over. Blessings on you and have a good program.
Thank you very much. Pleasant good afternoon to my listeners. Welcome to another episode of WTR, Habits That Count, a place where we examine issues and concerns and we identify practices or habits that we can implement to fix them. And I am your host, Dr. Martha J. And today we are focusing on literacy because it is International Literacy Day. So if you're listening in Dominica, in the Caribbean, in the diaspora, wherever you're listening, we are going to be focusing on literacy today. And I want to say that today, Labitil is brought to you compliments of Budding Writers Academy. Budding Writers, we focus a lot on developing literacy in students. And the most important thing for us at Budding Writers is to make sure that we can develop an appreciation for reading. When we develop an appreciation for reading and we get them to like writing, then obviously they can go out and be anything they want to be. And so at Budding Writers, we provide professional development services to schools on a needs basis. So if a school feels that they need professional development based on teacher leadership or for teacher coaching or for just how to use higher order thinking questions, whatever their needs are, we provide professional development for that. We accept government contracts. We do any kind of funding that people have. We accept purchase orders. We do all of that. We also travel to wherever they are, where the needs are, and we also provide our services to public schools, parochial schools, private schools, and even after-school programs. So Budding Writers Academy, anything you want as far as literacy, we can provide that for you. Today, if you're planning to call us on our program, your local number with DBS to call is 448-3284 or 1-800-327. And if you're calling internationally, it is 305-432-9744, and that's via WhatsApp. So again, this week, our focus is on literacy. A simple definition is the ability to read, write, and speak and listen, and to be able to communicate effectively. It doesn't matter in what field of study. For example, you could be a computer programmer, and are you literate enough in that area? What about computer literacy? What about financial literacy or digital literacy? How to use the internet? So literacy in general is, are you able to read, write, speak, listen in that field and communicate it effectively? So being able to understand and read and to communicate in any discipline is what we mean when we say literacy. Now, most nations, they test for reading, math, and some of them do science, and of course now financial literacy. But PISA, which is the Program for International Student Assessment, it's an international organization from OECD, and what they do, they test about 70 nations, 15-year-olds, and what they do, they check to see how good we are. And most of the times when we look at data, we look at the positives. We say, okay, well, 60% of the students are able to read and write well on grade level, or on age level for that matter. Or we say 70% of students, and we are happy about it because 70% of our students passed. But it was this reality, the reality that we tend to sometimes forget, the 30% and the 40% that kind of nobody pay attention to because they didn't pass, or we're going to leave them for the next time. It was because of this reality that WTR, or the Writing to Respond process, came into perspective. So in 2009, when I had an opportunity to pay attention to those students, the students that were not counted in the statistics, I came up with the Writing to Respond process. It became a school-wide phenomenon, and in 2012, it was published. And since then, it became a catalyst for helping students in individual classrooms, in schools, in school districts, to develop an appreciation for reading and improving their writing skills. And that, of course, is in parochial schools, public schools, private schools, even home schools. And parents individually decided to utilize it to make sure that their students were able to develop that appreciation for reading and, of course, build their writing skills. And you probably will ask, why am I focused on writing? It's because one of the statistics I looked at states that 60% of the students who are able to read well on grade level, they are not able to write on grade level. And so, budding writers and the Writing to Respond process, we look at reading and writing concurrently. If you can read well, you should be able to write well. So in 2017, we got permission to share the process at all elementary schools in Dominica. And a few of those schools have tried and they've struggled to hold on to the approach. Last year in 2023, with the help of Bernadette Francis Foundation and the blessings of the Division of Education, of course, Dr. Blaise, we rekindled the efforts to use the Writing to Respond process as an approach. And I'm gonna stress approach because I think that's one of the things that people are misguided about. They think it's a program and they're like, oh, it's going to be more work for me. No, it's not. It is an approach to improve literacy in schools. And so today on our program, we have with us Miss Violet Christopher, principal of Bells Elementary, as well as Mrs. Ingrid Elwa, who is a teacher leader of Bells Elementary. And what they will do, they will share with us how they utilize the Writing to Respond process in their schools to improve literacy at their schools. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. Miss Christopher, go ahead and introduce yourself to the public.
Hi, good evening, listeners and viewers. I am Violet Christopher, principal of Bells Primary School.
Thank you. And Miss Elwa, you are muted.
I am Ingrid Elwa, a teacher at the Bells Primary School.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So ladies, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be here. And hopefully what we're going to do is to share with the listening public. You know, at the end of Labitil, we always want to share habits that people can implement so that they can develop critical thinking in their students and hopefully to do what we want, which is to get that appreciation for reading and, of course, improve that writing skill. So I'm going to start with Miss Christopher. Miss Christopher, tell us why you chose to implement WTR at your school.
Okay, before I tell you why we chose to implement WTR at the Bells Primary School, I would like to inform you that it was a journey. It wasn't an easy one.
Good.
The journey started back in the summer workshop of 2017 at the Dominica Grammar School, I can clearly remember, which Mrs. Elwa and I attended. In September of that year, we tried to implement the program, not the program, but the approach
Mhm.
to members of staff. And it was a challenge because, as we said, they thought that it was just more work.
Mhm.
Fast forward to the academic year 2023-2024, when our school was chosen as one of the OECS Pearl projects, and Pearl means Educational Advancement for Relevant Learning, which is just about enhancing learning. We decided to revisit the approach again. We still got that kind of challenge from the teachers, but however, we, we stuck to it and we decided to move forward. And when we informed you that we were going to use it as part of our strategy for the third project, you embraced it. And for that, we are very thankful.
Very good. And so I was about to share. So tell us a little bit more as to how you incorporated it with the Pearl project, because you did mention that you mentioned it with you incorporated with the Pearl project. But if you can just tell us how. And I still want to let listeners know that in 2017, yes, you had your struggles with teachers, but that's the same year we had Maria, and everybody just went back. We went back 10 years if you have to think of Maria. So while it is true that you may have had struggles with that, we also want to recognize and acknowledge that Maria played a big role in us not doing much from 2017. So go ahead and tell us, how do you incorporate that with your Pearl approach?
Okay, the project had a financial theme to it, and we used most of that money to take our children on field trips, since we realized that our children have limited prior knowledge. So I'm going to give you a step-by-step report as to how we prepared our children for our trips before, during, and after using the WTR.
Okay.
First, before we go on the trips, before we embark on our trip, we sat down with you, Ms. J, Mrs. Elwa, lead, and I, and we formulated some questions that we would like the children to bear in mind that they should ask whoever their guide was. That is before going on the trip. These questions we go over the questions with the children, get them to understand them, and they were free to ask any other questions to the guide when they got on site. Okay?
Beautiful.
The questions were developed from lower to higher order using the Bloom's taxonomy. And seeing that it was a whole school project from pre-K to K, as expected, the pre-K and the K1 would do the lower order, although we could challenge them because some of them can think well, and then the bigger children from 3 to 6 would do the higher order questions from the Bloom's taxonomy. Before boarding the bus, we would remind the children that yes, we are going out to have fun, but we are going to learn. And one thing that every child must take on the trip is a book and a pencil. Purpose for this is that they're going to collect data.
That's right.
Which when they come back, they are going to use it to write. So during the trip, we took the opportunity to give students a guided tour. So while we are on the bus, we will tell them they are tourists. Today you are tourists, and we will pose the question to them. You live in Dominica, you're going to visit sites in Dominica. What kind of tourist are you? And we do that every time. So by the end of the process, they must remember that they are domestic tourists. They too are tourists. When we get to our destination, the children are free to ask questions to their guide and free to ask any questions that they are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The smaller children would draw.
Very good.
Those in between would draw and write a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, back at school, the information that the children collected, it wasn't only used for writing, because as our SMARTY goals, we were looking to improve writing, comprehension, and social studies. So after analyzing the process, seeing where our children were before and where are now using the process, we realize that the WTR can be used across the curriculum.
Across curriculum. Thank you very much. And I just want people to understand that it can be used across curriculum and across grade levels. So let's go to Mrs. Elwa. Mrs. Elwa, how is it used to develop critical thinking in your students, particularly the young ones? Because I know you have, access to the K and all the way up to the fifth. So tell us how that happened, how that works.
Okay, so for the WTR, like she said, is a process that is used to cause children to think critically, to problem solve. So what we would do, we would take a story, for example, or maybe an outing, and then we would first teach them to identify. The strategy or the approach, focuses on 5 main things. You have to identify, you have to summarize, you have to react, which is very important. You have to synthesize, you have to evaluate, you have to analyze. So we take a story and we want to move them because we already know that they can identify. So we want to move them from identify. So we ask them to summarize the story. After that, you can teach that in isolation because you want them to get that. So you have a few lessons where you teach the children to summarize because they don't know yet. So you have to teach it to them. So most times you have to give them what you want to bring out of them. And then you're going to get something good at the end. So we teach them to summarize, and then they take the story, they would tell the most important parts of the story in 2 to 3 sentences. So they identify and they summarize together. So after they identify and they can summarize, then they can put those 2 parts of the story together. Then we take that same story. We're not using a different story. We use the same story, and then we teach them how they have to react. We want them to react to what it is that they have heard. So, like, for example, we went out to the airport, and then we asked them, how did you feel about it? What feelings came to you when you got to the airport? How did you feel being in the airport? And then we also teach them to ask questions, because we know sometimes even we as adults, we go to a workshop or we go to a meeting or somewhere, and then we want to ask a question, but we are not sure or we don't know. And children are the same too. They have their questions, but some of them don't really know how to phrase the question. So as teachers, we teach them how to ask questions. We probe them. We ask them questions. And so if I read a story to my class and then I say, anybody has a question? Most times at the beginning, nobody would answer. So what I did, I gave them questions. I asked them questions and I asked them to pay attention. So then another time I would read a story and then I would tell them, okay, it's your turn to ask questions. So then they get a grip on what it is that they have to ask, how they have to ask. And it really opens them, because you can see that some of them, it brings out the questions that are already inside of them. So they ask questions about what it is that they're reading. So maybe they read a story and something puzzled them in the story. You ask them, what puzzles you about the story? What was surprising to you about the story? And when we took them to the airport, so we asked them, what surprised you about your airport trip? And some of them said, well, Miss, I never thought that there was an airway or there were roads in the sky. And it was interesting to see their faces when the guy explained to them that there are roads in the sky just as there are roads on earth. And so they were able to ask questions. They were able to ask the man certain questions because we had already started the process with them. So the approach opens them up to asking questions, to question what they read. Because we want our children, we don't want people to just tell our children things and then they cannot question it. Children are supposed to question certain things. So they questioning it not only helps with their writing, but it also helps them as they grow up. It helps them in their daily lives.
Analytical
They will
thinking,
go,
exactly.
right. They will go to
Awesome.
school and people will tell them things. So they're able now to raise questions and think critically and see, well, is that right for me? Is that not right for me? So the approach is really working and it really opens the children and you really see them. And we also teach the children to analyze the information that they read. Break it down into parts. And when then after they break it down, we teach them to synthesize. Now bring it together, but put your spin on it. Make something new out of it. So okay, you read a story now, you break down the parts. How would you write the story differently? How would you change it? So they are able to evaluate, they're able to analyze. And if they can do that with a story, then they can do that in any situation. And that is what we are teaching children to do. Not just writing stories. The approach, we use it for writing stories, but it extends into their life as well, their daily life. And children are asking questions, they are questioning things, they are thinking critically. We read a story. Most teachers, if you are listening, you know the story and you are affiliated with Hands Across the Sea, you will know the story, book titled Calabash, how Granny got that shell by the sea and then she went into the market square and she was able to make a big pot of soup. But now you can ask the children, what do you think of Granny? Was Granny right in tricking the market people? Is it good to go about tricking? Would she, is it right for Granny to move from village to village because she has no money, tricking the villagers? So we go on to ask them, well, how else can we help Granny? In what way can we help Granny to see that she can make money for herself? And the children come up with different solutions. And if they can do that with a story, then again, they can do that in their daily life. So it really, and it opens up their writing. When they write, a little boy wrote, and I was all smiles from my only way up to my ears, and I ran to the principal office and I said, Miss, look. And, we were all excited because, the end result was what it is that we had working towards. So teaching them to react is a main aspect of the WTR approach. And then when you teach them to react, it focuses on analyzing it, on synthesizing and evaluating, then we are going to get good results from our children.
Awesome. And that takes me to, I can see the passion, Mrs. Eddie. Thank you.
Yes, I really love the approach. I can see the passion. Because when I came from the workshop, the year after that, I got a class of children and then they couldn't really write. And I said, but how am I going to help these children write? And then I said, I went to that workshop and I really enjoyed that workshop. And I felt so good about the pieces of writing the examples that you brought forward from children who had used the approach. And I said, well, I'm going to use it with my children. And then when I used that with the children, you could really see the children opening up to their love for books, their love for writing. It was just beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I can see you're very passionate about it. And I want to just let people know that when Miss Ellie talk about the questions, we teach the students question stems, the question stems that will show up for analysis. How does such and such compare to this? How does the woman in the story compare to somebody you know in real life? Do you agree with what the old woman did? What solution could you have? So we have question stems on Bloom's taxonomy, and of course, Mrs. Christopher mentioned that we teach the kids from kindergarten how to respond to higher order thinking questions. And once they can respond to it, they can articulate it, they are going to be able to write it. Our time is running down so quickly. Miss Christopher, tell us.
Yes, there is one scenario I wanted to share with you.
Go ahead.
Yes, there's this little child from the K on one of pre-K preschool. On one of our trips, she looked at the Caribbean Sea and she said, Miss, if I fall into the sea, what would you do? So the teacher said, I would cry. The little girl looked at her and said, you would only cry? You would ask for help then. So even at that stage, that
Mhm.
little child knew crying would not solve her problem. Something else
Exactly.
had solved
Very
it.
good. Because
So she
that's
was
one awesome. Because that's one of the things that when I created Adventures of the Yanni, the first story, and I asked a child who was in third grade, and I said, but Yanni fell, and then she ended up on the other side. What would she should do? And she said, oh well, she should be careful next time. But I had to probe that child, and then she realized, oh, well, she should find friends, and then go sleep, find a place to sleep, and tomorrow she'll find new friends. So we go through the process to teach kids to think critically, and problem solving is one of them. Our time is flying so quickly. I have to ask you, Miss Christopher, what has been the results? Apart from all of those effective things that we talked about, the appreciation for books, the ability to be articulate. What other results have you seen in your school from 2023, utilizing the writing to respond process as an approach along your Pearl program at your school?
okay. After analyzing students' writing portfolio, because we collected a portfolio for each child,
Beautiful.
so we collected pieces before using the approach and while using the approach.
That's
And
right.
we realized that we met our target because we were aiming to have at least 60% of our students writing at or above grade level. And at the end of the school year, we were able to achieve that. So that's one good achievement for us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And I want other principals listening, and I'll ask you to pass that message on in a while. But Miss Ailey, I wanted to ask you, what would you want to tell other teachers who are afraid? Because I know the Ministry of Education has given their blessings a long time, from 2017, again in 2018, and again in 2023. But people are just thinking that it's a burden. Oh, it's just more work and I don't want more work. What would you tell teachers who are listening to you now and who have access to WTR, or principals in general who just afraid because they think that it's additional work? What do you have to say to them?
Well, I would tell them that it is not additional work. It is your approach. It is the way that you ask questions, and that is the focus. The way that you ask the children the questions after they have read the social studies, science, the stories. It's the way that you ask the question the children. So you are still teaching comprehension. You are still in the lower grades. You teach storytelling, but you change the way that you question the children to bring out that critical thinking aspect in them. And I also want to tell them that there is help along the way. While we were doing our approach, Miss Dr. J was there with us, helping us and guiding us every step of the way. She did sessions with us, so you can also get that support. So, and there, I am always available if anybody wants to. Few principals have already asked for help, so I am available to help in whatever way I can. But it is not extra work. Don't think of it as extra work. It is just your approach to asking the children questions and how you go about it.
Thank you very
But
much.
you are doing, it is nothing new to teachers.
It's not new.
Not new.
It's
No,
not new.
it is
It's
not
just
new.
structure. It's just structure.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
All
It's
it
doing
is
it in a
structure.
structured way.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
Yes. Miss Christopher, your turn. Talk to principals who are listening. Let them know what you've achieved at Pearl, and we using Pearl and WTR together, because I know your school is not the only school with the Pearl project. And so talk to the other schools. Let them know what your results have been, what it has been for you utilizing WTR along with your project, and probably give them a word of encouragement. Talk to them.
I think I've already told them that we have risen from up to 60% of our children writing at above grade level. What I would like to do is to encourage principals to get on board and use the writing to respond process approach. It is not additional work. It is not additional work. It will help to develop the whole child. Because if a child can think critically, then they can do anything.
And
Yes, they can write.
that is so true. And with
Yes.
the writing to respond process, it's an approach. We have resources that go along with it. And Bernadette Francis Foundation, what they did, with budding writers, of course, I gave it to them. At a reduced cost, we were able to send the books down to Dominica. They are there waiting for principals. What we encourage principals to do is to find a donor in your community who wants to contribute to those books, because we've already given them out at a quarter of the price. All we want is donors to be able to say, hey, we're going to sponsor that school or one classroom in a school, and then we can provide principals with those schools with those resources. The Bell School had done an awesome job. They've selected Wednesdays as their day when they measure progress. So they utilize WTR every day in their classrooms across disciplines, but once a week they measure progress, and they use those workbooks to measure progress, and they have beautiful results. And I can say to you all, if you try it, you will do well as well. So I want to say to parents, do not wait on schools to develop critical thinking. You too can do that. When you take your kids to the garden, you take them to the movies, wherever you take your kids, you can go ahead and ask them those questions as well. On Budding Writers, we have a YouTube page where we have examples on how to utilize the process with your own children. So if your school is not engaged, you don't have an excuse. You go ahead and be engaged as well. Classroom teachers, like Mrs. Ailey said, Elwa said, in 2018, when her school was not doing it as a full school, she did it in her classroom. So if you're an educator and you feel like you want to try that with your kids, you can go ahead and try that with your students as well. Teachers, schools that have used it, districts that have used it, not just in Dominica, by the way, St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, and some schools in Florida, they have utilized it and have gotten great results. So I want to say that it was an approach that was utilized for my classroom, and I started sharing it, and it became something beautiful that works, especially for the ones that we tend to leave behind. So I want to say, particularly for the ones that are not counted in those percentages. So, like what Mrs. Christopher just said, 60% of my students are reading and writing on grade level. Now we want Mrs. Christopher to go back this year and focus on those 40% of those students who are still behind. I like to say, not that they didn't pass, they haven't passed yet. So they need some more probing. And as Mrs. Ellie said, the reaction phase of the process is where that seems to be more challenging for teachers, because that's when the students, you have to keep probing them. So I want to say to you that the writing to respond process is something that works. It helps people, children especially, develop an appreciation for reading, and then it improves their writing. So I always like to leave you with 4 things. So I'm going to say, expose students to new experiences. Try to do that on their grade level. Give them opportunities to summarize or write the short version. Give them opportunities to evaluate, to synthesize. And then move on to writing responses. Start orally first. Let them talk to you. And then move to writing responses. And of course, give them timely feedback. Let them know if it was good, if it was perfect. Ladies, our time is up. So I'm going to ask you to say bye-bye. Both of you, just say your bye-byes. And I will wrap it up. Go ahead, Miss Christopher.
Yes, I would like to say bye, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to your program. And I would also like to send a special message to the principals of schools who have started and they have been stalling. I understand your plight. Just keep at it. Don't give up. It's a good process. It's a good approach. It works.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Ely.
Like Miss Christopher said, thank you for your listening ear. And I would just like to encourage teachers who may feel that they don't know where to go with writing to embrace the WTR approach, and it will take you somewhere.
Awesome. Thank you. And next week, by the way, Mrs. Elwa is going to come back, and we're going to talk about how we can support schools in the process, and probably go through more of what we can do with you. So you can tune in next time. So I want to say to you, thank you so much for listening. You can listen to this back on DBS Radio Facebook page, on Budding Writers Facebook page. You can also listen to it on YouTube. And I always try to submit a podcast version for those of you who are not so much into Facebook. You have been listening to Labitil, Habits That Count, with Dr. Martha J. Until next time, I want to say to you, show some kindness to someone, and of course, plant a seed, it will grow. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Bye.